After the poll, I've heard you all and you like long form content. I've combined 3 videos that I was going to do over 3 separate days. So I've got it kind of split up between each video. You're going to see some outfit changes and things like that. Just ignore, it's just set up that way because I was going to do it as separate videos, but decided to release it all as one long form content. Welcome everyone and happy holidays, Merry Christmas, etc. Whatever you celebrate is fine with me. You know, I'm not a stickler for that stuff. But this holiday season, I was saying that we would do a couple of videos where I tell some ghost stories. So the idea with this, I'm just going to retell some ghost stories. I haven't checked any of them to see if they're true or not. This is just going to be for fun, entertainment purposes only. These are stories that have been told over time and time again, and it is very common for people to tell ghost stories around Christmas time. This is an old practice. So I figured, you know, this channel, I try to cover stuff that's spooky and paranormal and whatnot, and this is just the holidays, so we'd have a bit of fun and just tell some ghost stories. And normally, you know, it might be something that I do later on, maybe the new year, once a month, I'll do some ghost stories. What I'll probably do when I do it myself, so I'll do what I've done with the creepypastas and other things I've done in the past, where I'll just sort of rewrite it and do it as a more storytelling kind of thing. But for now, we're just going to tell some short ones that I found online. I'm just going to tell you the story of what I found, and yeah, you just have a bit of fun with it. Also, apologies for any mispronunciation of words or names. All right, to start, we're going to start with our first story, which is The Legend of the Mistletoe Bride that haunts England's Bramshill House. And again, reminder, I'm just kind of pulling these real quick off the internet. I might miss some things. I'm not debunking them in any way, but feel free to leave any comments if you're familiar with any of these stories. So the legend of the Mistletoe Bride, apparently it has been being told and retold for centuries, and it's taken many different forms to the story. No one's been able to determine its true origins, but some people believe that it has roots in the disappearance of Lord Lovell's bride at Bramshill House in Hampshire, England. So the story goes that allegedly Lord Lovell was preparing to wed a young woman related to Sir John Cope, the owner of Bramshill House. This was around Christmas, so mistletoe hung throughout the mansion. And the mistletoe inspired the group of people to play a little game. And the game was that they told the bride to go hide somewhere around the house, and all the groomsmen would run around and try to find her. So a little game of hide and seek. And whoever found her would also get the opportunity to kiss her. So the bride went off to go hide, and, you know, everyone did their little countdown, and then they started wandering the house trying to find her. However, they started looking everywhere and no one could find her. Went from minutes to hours and they still couldn't find her. She went completely missing and everyone had no idea where she went. So in a panic, you know, everyone started looking everywhere, and in the end, they honestly never found her. That is until 50 years later. And 50 years later, Lord Lovell, still seeking answers as to what happened to this girl, he found a secret closet in an upstairs room in the house. When he opened up the closet, he happened to find a chest, and inside it was locked. And when he opened it, he found the remains of the poor girl, but they were very decayed at that point. Now, the Mistletoe Bride would go on to haunt a specific girl. In 1923, an American society girl, Miss Edna Hilton, had just become the bride of Captain Denzil Cope, heir of Sir Anthony Cope, the chief of the ancient family that had long occupied the house that the chest was in. So, Miss Cope was well known in New York society, and she's one of the Hilton family that inherited part of the Stuart millions. Miss Cope was very well known in New York society, and for several years before her marriage, she lived in Paris, where her mother had a very fancy apartment. Now, because of her marriage, Edna would then become the new owner of the famous chest, which the poor bride was locked up in. And apparently Americans were all in a tizzy, curious about the kind of experiences that she would have. Now, so what was reported was, it was said that persons who stayed in the house were kept awake at night by the stifled moans of a woman in terrible agony. They would hear muffled sounds like those of a person beating the interior of a thick wooden chest. Soon the papers would begin actually printing different accounts of people who stayed at the house. There was a visiting English society woman who reported, "During the night, I had the most terrifying experience. Shortly after midnight, I was awakened suddenly with a sensation that I was not alone in the bedroom. Then, from behind the ancient oak paneling, I heard noises of light, hurrying footsteps. What followed was even more terrifying. I heard moans of the most heart-rending kind, and then strange sounds like hands beating upon a wooden partition. The moans so terrified me that I fainted away, and it was daylight when I recovered consciousness. I made an excuse for leaving the castle and hurried away." And not long after this one was printed, one of the old retainers at the castle, who soon left, declared that in the stillness of the night he heard the clatter of bony feet hurrying up the stairway into the attic. Along with that, he also heard the sound of swishing from skirts, and later on, a muffled thump like the falling of a cover of a heavy chest. The chest began a bit of an exhibit, and they would show it off to anyone who came to the house. But it looks like the ghostly activity didn't just stay at that house. These people were quite rich and they had different homes. And whenever they traveled to one of their other homes, the ghost would follow them as well. But it would seem that the story died after that, as no one else reported any other hauntings or anything else to do with the chest. Now, the next story on our list is about the Brown Lady of Raynam Hall. This is an interesting one because a photograph was actually captured of this in 1936. They said that they captured what they believed to be her spirit on the staircase here. And I found this one interesting too because Harry Price, who, played a role in paranormal investigations and trying to be more skeptical with them, he actually confirmed that the photograph was real. So, people now think it was a double exposure thing. But regardless, it was a bit of an interesting story. I'll also show the picture as well on the screen here. The story goes that they were there doing a photograph shoot for Country Life magazine. And when they were doing photos on the staircase, that everyone there saw like a white mist go down the stairs. And so they pretty much all said that they saw a ghost in person. They snapped the picture and the picture captured a ghost. But leading up to this moment, this place already had a reputation for ghost sightings and spooky things witnessed by patrons and people that have lived there in the past. For 400 years, Raynam Hall had been a big part of the Townshend family. In 1713, Charles Townshend, the second Viscount of Townshend, married Dorothy Walpole, the sister of England's first Prime Minister, Robert Walpole. Now, this was Townshend's second marriage. Sorry, I think I'm saying his name wrong throughout all this, so I'm trying my best here. But rumor had it that Dorothy had once been the mistress of Lord Wharton, a royal playboy. According to the legend, when Charles discovered Dorothy's secret love life in 1725, he locked her up in the hall, telling everyone that she had died, and even holding a mock funeral as well. In reality, Dorothy was just roaming the halls of Raynam Hall as a prisoner, suffering until her death from smallpox in 1726. So people believe that this ghostly sighting and the ghost that's wandering around is her. The first sighting actually occurred at a Christmas celebration in 1835. A guest claimed to have seen a lady wandering the halls in a brown dress. Another had a sighting as well, saying that he had approached her in the hall. She turned to him with a glowing face, but where her eyes should have been, there were only empty sockets. Some members of the staff were so terrified of the brown lady that they allegedly fled the house, never to return. There's one interesting record from a Captain Frederick, who is a friend of Charles Dickens, and his daughter goes on to describe what happened to him when he stayed the night at Raynam Hall. And she says, "The figure halted of its own accord before the door, behind which my father stood, and holding the lighted lamp, she carried her features, grinned in a malicious and diabolical manner at him. This act so infuriated my father, who is anything but lamb-like in disposition, that he sprang into the corridor with a bound and discharged the revolver right in her face. The figure instantly disappeared, and the bullet passed through the outer door on the opposite side of the corridor and lodged in the panel in the inner one. My father never attempted again to interfere with the Brown Lady of Raynam. In 1926, Lady Townsend's own son had also a run-in with the Brown Lady. Apparently, he saw her at some point, and he became very upset when he saw the portrait of Dorothy Walpole that hung in the house. He claimed that that was the woman that he seen in the hallway. Raynam Hall still remains in the hands of the Townshend family to this day. The current Marquis is married and has 2 children, but they haven't reported any ghostly sightings. Now our next story takes place in New York. It's the haunting of 136 Clinton Avenue. This story actually ended up in the New York Times, and it was in the 1800s, so again, around the Victorian spiritualist movement. There's a lot of stories coming out around this time as well, especially because of the printing press. So this one was published December 20th, 1878, which was just in time for Christmas ghost storytelling time. There is a beautiful Greek revival house at 136 Clinton Avenue near the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and it still actually stands today. According to the story and in the article, there was a resident living there. His name was Edward F. Smith, and everything began early in December of that year. He kept hearing a doorbell ringing, and when he went to answer the door, nobody was there. It ended up happening a few times that night, and at the same time, 2 rear doors of the house were kicked and rattled and banged with great rigor. This awoke and disturbed his wife and 2 other tenants. But Mr. Smith dismissed it and told everyone, "It's just the wind, don't worry about it." They all went back to sleep that night, but every night since then, the disturbances continued. Mr. Smith eventually started sprinkling flour and ashes along the approach to the front door, but no footsteps were ever discovered in it. He called the police, and the police actually even spent the night there to try to figure out what was going on, but despite the door continually being knocked at and the doorbell being rang, they couldn't determine the cause. The police couldn't even see anyone at the door either or track down what was happening. Eventually, out of frustration, they decided to set a trap. The police were helping with setting a trap. So they had numerous officers hiding around the house. The bell rang again, but Police Captain McLaughlin opened the door only to find empty air and nobody was there. Despite the fact that there were police officers guarding the path to the door and everything as well, a brick suddenly was thrown into the dining room window. And even the following day, a police officer went through the whole house trying to see if there were any paranormal mechanisms or things set up that could be tricking them and other people. But he was unable to find anything. This all carried on for about 3 weeks when it just suddenly stopped. But during those 3 weeks, 136 Clinton Avenue was inundated with gawkers and spiritualists who were begging for access to do seances and investigations. Mr. Smith didn't want any of that, and he wouldn't let anyone into the house. He's quoted as saying, "They won't get in here. We consider ourselves perfectly able to take care of any ghost that comes along." A follow-up story to the original one that was posted in the New York Times went on to say that the ghost had not returned, though that had not deterred the spiritualists from conducting semi-seances on the sidewalk. The police periodically had to get rid of people and, shoo away the crowds. And apparently Captain McLaughlin was bit on the fingers by one powerful man who refused to move. Locals had theories about what ghost might have been haunting it. Apparently there was a lawyer who took his own life, and some people believed that it was maybe his ghost that was making the haunting noises. But Mr. Smith went on to say that he believed that it was Satan and that the ghost stopped because he went into a long and earnest prayer to get it to go away. But that ends the story there. Only 3 weeks and it stopped, never to return again. This is the Headless Horseman of Roos Hall. Roos Hall is a mysterious mansion in the English countryside, and it's rumored to be one of the most haunted places in England. It's located just outside the small town of Beccles in the county of Suffolk. It was first built in the 16th century and has many ghost stories associated with it. One of the big ghost stories that gets brought up this time of the year is the Headless Horseman. It is said that numerous visitors to Roos Hall have reported a man on a horse riding toward them on the road, only to discover that he has no head. Most often reported on Christmas Eve, the headless horseman is seen clattering down the driveway with his phantom coach and 4 horses. There's other reported paranormal things about this place as well. Rumors about strange markings inside the hall known as Devil's Footprints, and also people have reported seeing a girl watching them from the windows as well. But related to Christmas seems to be more often than not is this headless horseman sightings. Our next installment of telling some ghost stories for Christmas. Apologies in advance if you hear my neighbors, they are very noisy. Also, I got a new light from KK, my friend there that we do the ghost debunk top 5s with. So I'm dialing in, I guess, what kind of light temperature and strength and whatnot to be at here. So, we'll try to figure it out. I'm going to be doing like some upgrades to the video hardware and like different things like that in the next couple months. So we'll see some changes come through. All right, let's get into some spooky stories. All right, to start, we're going to talk about a Christmas ghost that is said to haunt Bastion Square in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. And this story, I've got it pulled up off of the timecolonius.com if you're interested. And if you're ever in the area, they also do ghost tours. And this is on one of their ghost tours as well. You can find tickets for the ghost tour at discoverthepast.com. The event that led up to a ghost haunting this area happened on Christmas Eve in 1890, when a young man was unfortunately shot in front of St. Andrew's Cathedral on Blanchard Street in a case of mistaken identity. And supposedly ever since, his spirit has been haunting the streets there. The story goes, just as the clock was striking midnight, ushering in the joyous Christmas day, a crime as dark, cowardly, and mysterious as ever disfigured the history of this province was perpetuated. This is what was said on the front page story in the Daily Colonist on December 25th, 1890. Which this tour that is held, actually there's multiple different Christmas related deaths in the area, and this tour actually tells you stories of all of them that happened. So what exactly happened? Well, David Fee, a 21-year-old son of a grocer, was in town to visit his parents. He had been at a masquerade party and was dressed up in a white clown costume. He decided to pop over to the church, which was under construction for midnight mass, and he showed up there with his parents. But it just so happened at the same time a watchman of the cathedral was downing whiskey and plotting revenge on a laborer who had told him to take down his Irish independence flag. He knew that the man that he was mad at wore a white overcoat, and he waited for him at the corner of View and Blanchard Streets. Fee and a friend were walking toward the church when the watchman, Clarence Phelan, yelled from the corner, "You challenged me." The two of them turned, and at that instant, the man raised a double-barreled and fired. The muzzle was only within 4 feet of Fee's chest. The young man fell down onto the sidewalk, and there he perished. This is what the Daily Colonist story wrote. Before Fee could even say anything, the man fired and shot him. As it turns out, the man confused Fee with this other man that he had a particular beef with. And ever since then, it's rumored that Fee wanders the streets in front of the cathedral and outside his gravesite as well at Ross Bay Cemetery. A lot of people describe a feeling of apprehension in the area, and some people witness seeing a man with a red blotch on his chest wandering around. There's been different sightings, and Adams, who runs the tour, has collected them all, and he believes that they all relate back to Fee. Tell me, do you live in the area? Have you ever experienced Fee's ghosts? Or have you gone on this walking tour before? Leave your comments below. Our next story is about Anne of Boleyn, which most people are familiar with her. If you're not, she is one of the wives of King Henry VIII. She was actually the more controversial one. She's the one that kind of started him on getting new wives all the time. She pushed and helped him get a divorce from his first wife so she could marry him. And then when she didn't provide a male heir, because that was always a problem with Henry, is he couldn't get a male heir. So when she couldn't provide one, a bunch of rumors started started up about her, being unfaithful to him and doing a bunch of different stuff. And he ended up believing them, even though there's a lot of stories that he actually really loved her, but he felt like pressured to have to believe them, or at least felt pressured to have to act on them because he's the king. So essentially, he ended up putting her to death for like treason. Right. So she is, I believe, his first wife that got put to death for, essentially not performing her duty, which was the most important part, providing male heir. She did provide a female, which would be Queen Elizabeth I, who would eventually go on to rule for some time. Now, the story with her is that apparently every Christmas Eve, she is said to return to her childhood home, Hever Castle or Hever Castle, I'm probably saying it wrong, which is in the British countryside of Kent. So it was once her home. She grew up there with her family, with the Boleyn family. So before she married King Henry VIII, that was her home for, the majority of her life, right? Within a few short years after her marriage, and of course, this is when everything started with the gossip and the accusations, and eventually she was put to death. Who knows if she returns because of heartbreak or homesickness, or maybe it's just a residual haunting and it's just memory of her that shows up every Christmas. But the reports are that Anne wanders the halls of the childhood home, but only for one day, and that is Christmas Eve. It is said, and I quote, "Her somber spectre is seen drifting silently over the picturesque bridge that spans the River Eden in the grounds in the home where she knew much happiness." Perhaps if it is her spirit, maybe that's why she returns on Christmas, so she has a moment of happiness. Who knows for sure? Have any of you ever been to this castle? Do any of you have experiences there as well? Or what are your thoughts on Anne Boleyn and residual hauntings or ghosts? Leave a comment below. Our next story is about a slain highwayman who supposedly appears every Christmas Eve. I couldn't find information exactly on where this was located. Again, I haven't done deep dives on these stories. I'm just kind of pulling a quick story up, but I looked it over. All I could really find is related to a Radcliffe family, and the story is found in a book called Haunted England, and it's the Penguin Book of Ghosts. It's also known as the Highwayman Christmas Eve Ghost. Now, the story comes from England, 18th century, and the story goes something like this. According to legend, there was once a fearsome highwayman known only as Gilbert, who would wander up and down one of the town's main roads. One evening, the night before Christmas, a man and his daughter were traveling on a horse-drawn coach when Gilbert apprehended them. The daughter was able to escape, but the horses became startled and started running down the road with the coachman and her father. The two men struggled to get the horses back under control so they could go back and find the daughter, who was left with Gilbert. However, when they arrived back at the scene, she was gone. Instead, they saw Gilbert hunched over with a dagger in his stomach. Now, this is where the story is probably not real, or at least it's just something made up, but rumor says that apparently once the coach took off down the road, Gilbert then revealed to the girl that he's the one who took the life of her brother some time ago, and thrown into a rage at this revelation, she attacked him, dagger in the stomach, and then fled the scene. If anything, it was more likely he tried to attack her, she fought back, and then this is what happened. That's probably more likely. But local legends say that Gilbert was buried by the side of the road, and every Christmas Eve he can be seen wandering the same road up and down, waiting for the coach with the man and his daughter to pass by again. Chances are this is all one of those local legend rumor stories, because it's all kind of seems a little bit too well written, but I couldn't really find any other information on it. I threw it in here anyways for entertainment purposes. This whole Christmas ghost story episodes that we're doing, it's all for entertainment. This stuff is not proven or anything, so take it with a grain of salt. Our next story is about a Christmas carol singing spirit at Hotel Bethlehem. In Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, there's Hotel Bethlehem. It's actually quite a haunted hotel, apparently, and home to a number of different ghost stories. But this particular one is centered around a spirit who, when she was alive, her name was Mary Yohe. Born in 1866, Mary was raised in sort of the showbiz. Her family was on the stage, and she really enjoyed singing and performing for people. She ended up being quite good, and it garnered her a lot of attention, and eventually she found herself performing with great success in her career. She could be found on stages all throughout Europe and Paris. She eventually caught the heart of a lord who married her and made her a member of British aristocracy. Unfortunately, her success would lead down sort of a bad path. Her marriage ended up falling apart. The man that she was in love with turned out to end up going bankrupt, and she went on to eventually marry an American soldier who then robbed her of most of her wealth that she achieved from her performing. Eventually, when she passed away from old age, she was noted as saying that the best time in her life was actually during her stage time in Bethlehem. And even today, there's reports that visitors claim to see and hear Mary dressed in her fancy attire, performing and singing Christmas carols at the piano or pacing next to the Christmas tree. And if it wasn't Christmas carols, then she'd be singing some of her favorite tunes as well. But let me know, have any of you ever been to this hotel? Do you have any stories to tell? Let me know what you thought of this story. Leave a comment below. I live underneath a tornado. All right, welcome back for the last episode of our Christmas ghost stories. Our first story is about the ghosts of Poland's kings are said to gather in a dragon's den on Christmas Eve. Now, it's said that this happens in Wawel Castle, which is in the middle of Krakow in Poland. This castle was home to the kings of Poland for many centuries. It's been standing ever since the Middle Ages. Since it's been standing for so long, there's been ghost stories associated with it for some time. Even there was ghost stories apparently from as far back as the prehistoric age, because I guess this area was very popular for the region. Right? Like they built the castle here shortly after humans started settling. So then there's stories, I guess, that stuff happened in a prehistoric age and stuff still haunts this castle. So this castle has a lot of history behind it. But today's story involves a big series of caves that are rumored to exist under a plot nearby known as Wawel Hill. The caves were discovered centuries ago, and everyone's been sort of exploring them ever since. And there's a rumor that inside the caves, there is a statue of a dragon and a millennia of human record as well. So the rumor says essentially that these caves were home to prehistoric humans, and it's got records from them written on the walls. This ghost story is found in the book Encyclopedia of Haunted Places, Ghostly Locales from Around the World. And I pulled the summary for this story from ranker.com as well. I'm linking everything too. So the story goes that in the 11th century, there was a King Casimir. He was just a child at the time when he became king. When he was a child, he decided that he wanted to go explore these caves and find these secrets within. It's said that he came across a strange tunnel while he was exploring the caves. And inside, he claimed to have found a large stone emitting a glowing light. He went and approached it, and he essentially described that the glowing light was emitting a magical protective barrier, and he said that he recognized this, I guess, throughout all of Krakow. So the legend pretty much states that this area in the cave, or this cave, was a very special part of Krakow. And every Christmas Eve, all the past kings of Krakow go and meet in this cave, and they discuss the fate of Krakow itself. Apparently there's also stories that there was like an actual dragon living in these caves, and that the people would give the dragon virgins, I guess, too. There was apparently some fossils and stuff found in the cave that, just bolstered the story, although it was probably just normal animals. So the cave has quite a mythology behind it. The cave is a limestone cave, and it is said that spirits and different energies like that do travel or get trapped or something, or are energized by limestone. That is like a thing that's said. I don't know if it's proven or anything, but you know, if it is the case, maybe the limestone has something to do with it. Maybe we react to limestone a certain way and we feel that certain things are happening. Who knows? But that is kind of interesting that it is a limestone cave, because it is a thing that people say about ghost limestone. A man-made entrance was eventually made into the caves. It's sort of like a tourist trap now, and you can go in there, and there's a statue of a breathing fire dragon as well if you want to go ever take a tour of it. The next ghost story I'm going to tell you about, it's not really a Christmas ghost story. I'm just going to tell you a story of one of the haunted places that I lived in once before. And this happened in a town. It's an old town, and it's pretty much its one resource is antique markets. So, you know, there is a history or, you know, a thought that antiques are very haunted because of how old a lot of the pieces are. And this particular town, I always felt like there's no water in this town. There's no rivers, there's no lakes. Like I've always lived around water, and it's the only place I lived at that didn't have any water whatsoever. So I always felt like all the energy in the town was really trapped in there because there was no water to take it anywhere, and all these antiques were like trapped there too. There was a lot of haunted places in that town. Like a bunch of the stores were haunted, restaurants were haunted. There's tons of stories that came out of there. I honestly would link it back to antiques. If I'm gonna say like any of it's true, it's got to be linked back to antiques. So I lived in a farmhouse, and the only bit of water that was in the town was a big water tank thing, silo thing, water tower, that's the word. So I lived in a farmhouse that was across from the water tower from the town, and when I moved in there, a lot of weird stuff happened in that house. So one is the kitchen was sort of, it looked like it was an add-on to the farmhouse itself. Kind of looked like it was like a mudroom, a very big mudroom that was eventually converted into a kitchen. You can kind of tell based on the building design and stuff. It wasn't brick, it was built with wood. It looked like a mudroom, but ended up being insulated and stuff for winter, right? It became the kitchen. So that particular room, the kitchen itself was the most haunted. And what I seen in it a few times was it looked like a old like 1812 or something soldier. Like it kind of looked like that sort of outfit from those times. And we did have quite a path as well. There was like a whole path in our area to do with the War of 1812, and like the path that the soldiers took on foot and everything. It's a huge path. It goes from like city to towns and stuff all over. If you're driving it, it's like you could do, I think, 2 hours of the drive, and people walk it every year for funsies. I've walked part of it, but it's way too long, and it goes through people's backyards and stuff now at this point. So this town was nearby that path, wasn't like right on it, but it was nearby it. So it makes sense that there might be a soldier. So I always saw the soldier. I lived there with my mom, my aunt, and my cousin, and they saw stuff too. The other thing is that in that kitchen itself, we would go out and all the lights would be turned off or they'd be on, like whatever. We would, leave them on or leave them off depending on whatever was going on, right? So they'd be off because we took off like during the day, we come home at night and, come home later than we realized, and all the lights would be on. Or we'd leave them on and then we come home and they're off. Or like times we would be pulling up and I'd see them flickering on and off. We'd see them flickering on and off. And we went in and like nobody was home. And they'd stop flickering and he would stop messing with the lights once you were home. But when we went out, that's when he would turn on and off the lights. Another time too, I like tripped over him in the kitchen. I thought he was one of the cats, but then when I jumped over it and I realized how tall it was, because it was like a person sitting on the ground with like, he was holding his like knees to his chest. And that's sort of how high it was. So when I realized like that was kind of tall, and then I looked back and there was like no cat in there, right? So that was kind of interesting as well. And then I used to see like a man, my mom would see a man too. So that was probably like the most haunted place. There was also like a weird thing in my cousin's room. There's like a balcony up there, and there's like just a weird energy and weird like feelings and vibes coming from that room that I didn't really care for. So I don't know what's true. I didn't really look into it because I was young, but I was told that apparently too that there was a farmer that owned the property, and he supposedly died in the field there. and I don't know if he had a heart attack or whatever while he was, doing his work. And then like locals or like a police or someone ended up seeing his body eventually. And there was different stories how he died, but the general one that I heard most often was just like a heart attack, right? Just randomly, died of a random thing. Normal causes. But there was other like extreme stories of him being like falling into a pitchfork. And then like another one is his horse attacked him or something, which didn't make sense. But if he was found in the field, it would be more likely that, it was probably some sort of heart attack, right? So that's the most haunted place I ever lived at. I have like the most stories, I guess, from that place. That place was interesting, and the whole town was interesting. The whole town has tons of stories too, so there's a bunch of crazy stuff that happened in that town. So that's one of my ghost stories. Anyway, I figured I'd share it with the Christmas ghost storytelling stuff as well. This next story is the story of Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville and his headless dog. I'm just adding in an extra story here because you all said that you liked the longer videos. So I'm just going to try to extend this out a little bit more for you all. Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville, although it might be Geoffrey even, he was also known as the Red Cloaked Knight. Sir Geoffrey lived around 1135 to 1153, during which was a time of a lot of civil wars going on. The saying was this time was when Christ and his saints slept because of how dangerous it was. He was an Earl of Essex and he had many manors, but he was known as a major player in the struggle for the throne between Stephen and Matilda. He supported both of them at various times, but in 1143 he was arrested by Stephen and stripped of his holdings. In response, Geoffrey raised a rebellion against Stephen, seizing many different locations, specifically Ramsay's Abbey as his base. He kicked the monks out and he fortified it, and this led to the Pope excommunicating him. He was then killed in battle the following year, and he wasn't eligible for Christian burial because of the excommunication, and this is why people think that he may still haunt the lands. The Knights Templar actually took his body and interred it in a lead coffin that they hung in the branches of a tree. Eventually, a priory did end up getting him recommunicated again, or got the excommunication reversed, and he was given a proper tomb in the temple and a proper burial. However, where the haunting comes into play is people said that Geoffrey laid a curse on the lands of Walden Abbey. He apparently made the curse that anyone who took his property or his endowments of the priory would, quote, feel the curse of Almighty God, of Saint Mary, of Blessed James the Apostle, and of all the saints in this present life, and that in life to come may he receive everlasting torment with the traitor Judas, unless he repents and makes amends. And some people have said that this occurred during Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries, and maybe this might be linked as to why. Also, it's written too that whoever betrayed him would experience ruin every 6 years on Christmas Eve. And people have said that they've witnessed on Christmas Eve him and a headless dog haunting the land, and he was draped in a long red cloak. People have reported also seeing him at all the different properties that he owned, like seeing this dog and a man dressed in a long red cloak at different times at all his different properties. Can't really find information as to where the dog came into play. I'm assuming that it was added as like a Hound of Hell kind of deal to the story. It's probably just flavor on the story. But I do find it interesting that he put that curse on everything, and then there was the dissolution and stuff. It's an interesting story. Tell me, what do you think? All right, one more small one. This story is about Alcatraz and a Christmas party that was interrupted there. Most people know about Alcatraz. It's one of the big prisons, and scary prison from back in the day. A lot of famous criminals ended up there. It did close down in 1963, but it's pretty well known to be a very haunted location. And I mean, there was a lot of people that probably passed away in there. There's a lot of dangerous criminals there. So I can imagine, if anything, not to get into technicalities what I believe, but I do believe in residual hauntings versus like an actual spirit being around. And this is the type of place that I would believe is residually haunted. But anyways, the story goes, Back in the 1940s, while it was still in operation, Warden Johnson, he decided to throw a Christmas party at the boarding house on the island. So this would be for the staff and everything. During the party, suddenly a phantom appeared, quote, wearing a gray suit, brimmed cap, and sporting mutton chop sideburns. The guards reported just standing there in shock for a minute before they could do anything. They said, and I quote, "The room suddenly turned very cold and the fire in the Ben Franklin stove was extinguished. And then suddenly the phantom just disappeared." And that was the only time that they apparently saw this thing, from what I can tell anyway in the story. All right, the last one I'm gonna read to you, it's from Reddit, and I just thought it was kind of a cute story in the end. I don't really think it's a ghost story, but it's kind of a cute story. He wrote it as a Christmas ghost story, but it's more like a weird, I don't know. It's a weird one. I'm just going to read it to you out here. This was posted by Knives Out 21 on Reddit. All right, so someone was asking, does anyone have, in this Paranormal Encounters Reddit group, someone was asking, does anyone have any Christmas ghost stories that they'd like to share, like real ghost stories? And this Knives Out person responds and says, yes, I was about 16. It was Christmas Eve and snowing heavily. My parents and myself were sitting in the living room with the Christmas tree lit, and they were having some eggnog and opening up stocking gifts, as well as is their tradition. This is where it gets a little bit ghostly. So they go on to say that they heard the door knocker bang very loudly 3 times, and they saw no one outside the window, but their dad went up and opened the door and looked down, and there was just a black cat lying across the threshold across the snow. They said what was even stranger is there was no human footprints or anything in the snow, no tire tracks, and logistically there was nowhere for anyone to have gone, or anyone to have not left footprints as well. They would have seen someone also coming and going from the door based on where they were sitting too. So if someone put the cat there, there would have been signs of a human walking up. The cat was still alive, so they shut the door and left it there, and it was gone in the morning. And then they go on to say, no, they're just joking. Their family are huge animal lovers, so of course they took the cat in and made it comfortable. It was a young male, not fixed, and it had been in a terrible fight, it looked like. A few days later, they took it to a vet and it recovered nicely. The weird thing, aside from the knocking and no footprints in the snow, was that their mom gave it to a friend that lived down the street. About 4 or 5 months later, the cat, now happily part of the family, woke them all up by howling and screaming and just freaking out. It turns out there was an electrical fire that started in the garage, and one of the cars was also on fire. They all woke up, everyone was okay, the car didn't blow up, and only the garage was damaged. But they're very lucky in general, especially because there's all kind of flammable stuff in the garage. Initially, they called him something stupid like Shadow, but then they renamed him to Clark after Superman after what he did to save the family. He's a really nice cat, and he lived on to be very old. So I thought that was kind of a sweet story. The door knocker thing was, I guess, the paranormal side of it, but just the cat thing was kind of cute. So anyway, I thought we'd end on a cute little story like that for the series. But I hope that you've all enjoyed the ghost stories, and I hope that you're having a good holiday. What I'll probably end up doing is I might end up doing something like once a month, where I'll do an episode where I tell maybe 1 or 2 ghost stories that I find online. Not that I'm confirming they're real or anything, just for funsies and entertainment purposes. I might pull them up or whatever, see what you guys think. But when I do that, what I'll do is I'll sit down and sort of rewrite it into kind of like a creepypasta short story, and I'll do a narration and stuff with it, because I do that often, where I'll rewrite stuff as well. I've done stuff where I've rewritten fairy tales into short stories too, so old Grimm fairy tales. So something I'm thinking about doing in the new year. But we'll see how it goes, but let me know what you think. If you missed all the videos before this one, I will link them as well. If this is the first one that you're seeing, you can check out the rest of them. As well, I'd like to thank our members and Patreon supporters. It really means a lot, all the support, and I do appreciate it. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope that you'll have a wonderful Christmas, and I will see you all in the next video. Don't worry about what to watch next, because I have linked a video, or if you want to sit and watch things for a little bit longer, a whole playlist on the side here. Go ahead and click those now to keep watching.